Okay, so first question, did you all watch the documentary, The Mother Tongue, which I made available for you on Cigar?
Yes.
Yes, teacher.
Good. That documentary is a preparation for you, which you are going to start reading David Crystal. So that's just for your knowledge to understand the supposedly barbaric origins of the English language. And English was a language of no power at all, but it has gained power uh, along with its history. And we'll learn and we'll reinforce this idea, this notion with the reading of Crystal that a language is as powerful as its nation. So this is the point of the documentary, showing you a bit of the origins of English, some similarities of English and Sanskrit and other ancient languages, so that you have a background to read the next book, which is David Crystal. Okay, but for today, I'd like to continue discussing Roque Laraya. Have you finished reading Laraya, at least the first part? I mean, page 52. Until page 52, I asked you to read. Did you? It
Yes,
was,
teacher.
yeah, it was the carnival task for you, okay, the non-carnival task. So when we read Laraya, we are presented to the ancient notions of culture, uh, to the distinction between culture as formal culture, the culture that we learn in schools, universities, and culture as a set of practices. And we saw that at some moment in history, science of culture uh, was developed, and this is anthropology. And some notions on culture superiority, culture inferiority, were in vogue, and there was kind of a standard of civilization, and what was above it was considered what was according to that standard. There was nothing above it, was considered civilized. What was uh, uh, how can I say, down this standard was considered to be savage. And there were some theories on how cultural differences have appeared. uh, Laraya will talk about two determinisms. The first one being geographical determinism, and the second one, which I know you all remember, is the two determinisms.
Geographical determinism. Yeah.
There's another one. Geographical determinism will basically claim that culture is determined by space, by nature. And the other one, I mean, nature, the geographical space. The other one, it also refers to nature. What kind of determinism is that?
Biological. Oh, biological.
Biological determinism. Basically, what does biological determinism claim? It's the topic of last class.
That some races they are superior to others because of genetic their
Yeah,
genetical character.
they attribute to genetics some racial or ethnical. I wouldn't say superiority, but the differences they attribute it to genetics. Uh, well, what is the problem that Laraya points to biological determinism? I mean, is genetics determinant for culture? Does Laraya agree with that? If he does, how does he do it? If he does not, how does he question this notion?
No, I guess because he doesn't agree with this because he says that one person that lives in United States when the person is a child. It can be with a family in Brazil. It can be raised with a family in Brazil, and this person will treat the family in Brazil uh, as equal, I guess, not different.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to quote here Felix Kessing, uh, in which he says, in page 17 in my physical edition, he says: não existe correlação significativa entre a distribuição dos caracteres genéticos e a distribuição dos comportamentos culturais. Qualquer criação humana normal pode ser educada em qualquer cultura, se for colocada desde o início em situação conveniente de aprendizado. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean about culture? Is culture inherited? I mean, genetically inherited? Or
No,
is it learned?
it's Lord.
Yeah, we learn culture. Okay. Now, what may happen if you get a Maranhense child and you take this child to Sweden at with months, days of age, and you raise this child in Sweden? Will this child still be a Maranhense in terms of culture?
No,
Probably a
No.
Swedish child. Yeah. Maybe, I mean, phenotypical differences will be noticed, the color of the skin, the color of the eyes, but culturally, this child will be Swedish. The same if we do it the other way around. Now, why is Kessing's quotation? There's no relationship, no significant relationship between genetics and culture. Why is this quotation so important, especially in the moment of the 1940s, 1950s? Why is it so relevant? I mean, scientifically, it has a contribution uh, that's, how can I say, remarkable. Why is it so remarkable? Think of the 1940s, 1950s. What do you know about this period of human history? And how does this assertion that there is no genetic cultural relationship will affect the ideologies in vogue at that time? And why did the United Nations uh, kind of required this kind of studies and provided resources for this kind of studies? What does this
Teacher,
assertion have to do with politics or with geopolitics?
teacher, in this
Yeah,
period happened the First World War, right?
the second.
The second, yeah.
Yeah. And what
The
was it
the
all about?
violation the
Mhm.
violation of human rights,
Violation of human rights based on what? Who were the two sides involved in World
religion.
War? Based on religion. I think religion was a kind of background for that, but there was more. Who were the two sides involved in World War II?
The Nazis.
The Nazis, and the Allied forces. And when I mean the Allied forces, we have the United States, we have Britain, especially Britain, and the Soviet Union on the one side, and the Nazi army on the other. Now, what did Nazi ideology claim?
But they are superior race.
Yeah, they claimed to be a superior race, the Aryan race, and they prosecuted the Jews for that. In fact, there was an economic background because the Jews were the owners of lots of money, jewelries, and so on. They had part of the material resources concentrated in their hands in Germany, but the excuse, let's put it this way, to prosecute Jews was a racial excuse, a racial argument that the Aryan race was superior. That's why the contribution of anthropology to, how can I say, to eliminate this kind of argument was decisive. And anthropology was a very important science at that moment. Now, biological determinism, as we have discussed last class, is one of the possible determinisms that ancient, I won't say ancient anthropology because that was not even anthropology, but ancient cultural studies try to justify cultural differences. The other one was geographical determinism. Now, does Laraya reinforce or question geographical determinism? What's his positioning and what's the positioning of modern anthropology on geographical determinism?
Can you repeat, teacher? I didn't understand, please.
Okay. Well, biological determinism was behind Nazi ideology. This is discussed last class. But there is a second kind of determinism, which is geographical determinism. First of all, what does it consist of? What does geographical determinism claim about cultural differences?
O ambiente físico.
Que tem um ambiente físico.
It means that you born on this land and were created on this land, so you are superior. You have some kind of culture that other people don't have.
Yeah, now we consider these assertions as stereotypes. Oh, the British are cold because Europe's cold, so they have a cold behavior. Or Germans are intelligent because they take more sun than the Nordics. This is nowadays considered to be stereotypes, but it was seriously taken at some moment before the existence of anthropology. Now, how does Laraya question this? How does Laraya undermine? How does he question this notion that the environment will shape culture?
And he will bring a lot of examples of people that live in the same place or in the same, I don't know how to say it, no mesmo clima, no mesmo espaço, e mostra que eles têm diferentes culturas independente disso, mesmo tendo essas mesmas características geográficas.
That's it. So one of the first things that one of the first myths that we have to break, and that still nowadays some pedagogical books reinforce, is that the British are cold, like generalizations. Like the British are formal. The British are too strict with time, with appointments. These are all stereotypes that we are led to believe, okay, but they are not universal truths. Some of these stereotypes are based on the idea that if you are born in a certain piece of land, you will behave like those that similarly to you were born at the same piece of land. Now, is this true? Do you all do everything that all Maranhenses do, or there are differences among us?
No, we are
We
different.
certainly see differences. Now, someone that looks from the outside will probably see us as more homogeneous, a more homogeneous population than we ourselves look at us from the inside. You see? So when you are in the inside, when you are inside the culture, you probably more sensible to realizing differences, cultural differences, differences in behavior. Laraya will question that the same weather, the same vegetation, the same kind of soil or the same kind of climatic conditions in general will produce different cultures, because humans
Teacher,
produce different answers to the same problems. Yes.
isn't it because they aren't living with us, they aren't seeing our culture by inside, and because of this, they generalize us?
Yeah, it's always a good idea if you want to have a community strongly involved with the nation of being a patriot or belonging, somehow belonging to a group. If you want to create this idea that you belong to a group, it's always necessary to have the difference. So we are what they are not. So who are we? We are what all the others are not. They are different from us. And then there's a tendency that you homogenize, you look at the other as homogeneous. Okay. But when we look at ourselves, we'll see how heterogeneous we are as a nation. For example, Brazil is not homogeneous. But when someone looks at us from the outside, they will probably stereotype us with Pelé, samba, carnival, uh,
Naked
maybe,
woman,
yeah,
naked
naked
women.
woman, naked women, beaches, and so on. The Amazon forest, like we work, we we hang on we hang on trees, and we move by anda pendurado de cipó, né? Pendurado no cipó igual Tarzan. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but there's a tendency that we look at other cultures, at other nations from a stereotyped point of view. And this stereotype helps us make this culture homogeneous, when in fact we are, and other nations are as well, heterogeneous. Okay, so there are two paths, two ways to homogenize a certain community. The first one we have seen is biological determinism, claiming that genetics will determine. And the second one is the piece of land in which you were born or in which you live in. So there was a belief that the environment would shape your behavior. Now, we are not saying that this is not true, okay? The environment does shape your behavior somehow, but somehow, not all the time. It will help shape, it will not determine. The problem here is not with geography. The problem here is with the word determinism. Okay, because when we say something determines, there is no other variable that will create cultural differences. It's only the environment, it's only genetics. Okay, so of course, if we didn't have the semi-arido, we would never know how to work with some irrigation techniques. But in the region of semi-arido, some people have created technologies to produce fruit. Some other people still raise cattle. Some other people still are fundamented in the plantations of grains, rice, beans, corn. You see? So different solutions for the same environment produced by different people. And Laraya will present us some examples to question this notion that the same environment, the same input, will always produce the same output. This is what we call historical particularism. Okay, so the assumption of geographical determinism is that factors such as the weather and the altitude may determine cultural diversity. And he will present us the examples of the Eskimos versus the Lapps in page 22. Let me read it for you. He will say that Eskimos and Lapps, they inhabit the same environment, but they produce different outputs for this environment. Page 22, he says, os esquimós constroem suas casas, iglus, cortando blocos de neve e amontoando-os no formato de colmeia. Por dentro, a casa é forrada com peles de animais e, com o auxílio do fogo, conseguem manter o seu interior suficientemente quente. É possível, então, desvencilhar-se das pesadas roupas, enquanto no exterior da casa a temperatura situa-se a muitos graus abaixo de 0 grau centígrado. Quando deseja, o esquimó abandona a casa, isso aqui é importante, quando deseja, o esquimó abandona a casa, tendo que carregar apenas os seus pertences e vai construir um novo retiro. No mesmo ambiente físico, né, os lapões. Os lapões, por sua vez, vivem em tendas de peles de rena. Quando desejam mudar os seus acampamentos, necessitam realizar um árduo trabalho, que se inicia pelo desmonte, pela retirada do gelo que se acumulou sobre as peles, pela secagem das mesmas e seu transporte para o novo sítio. Em compensação, os lapões são excelentes criadores de renas, enquanto tradicionalmente os esquimós limitam-se à caça desses mamíferos. Well, some of them raise mammals, some of them just hunt. This is a difference in output. Tem rena para todo lado. Uns criam, outros caçam. Sobre as casas, o comportamento dos esquimós é muito mais parecido com um comportamento fixo ou nômade?
Nômade.
Enquanto os lapões carregam, literalmente carregam as casas para outro lugar. Eles migram. De fato, eles migram. Mas carregando as casas, enquanto os esquimós as abandonam. Esses são... so we have different outputs for the same input, okay? Again, another example is in page 23, when he mentions two Indian tribes, two Aborigine tribes, the Pueblo and the Navajo Indians of North America. In page 23, he says, os índios Pueblo e Navajo, do sudoeste americano, portanto, mesma região, ocupam essencialmente o mesmo habitat, sendo que alguns índios Pueblo até vivem hoje em bolsões dentro da reserva Navajo. Os grupos Pueblos são aldeões com economia agrícola baseada principalmente no milho. Os navarros são descendentes de apanhadores de víveres, que se alimentavam de castanhas selvagens, sementes de capins e de caça. Mais ou menos como os Apache e outros grupos vizinhos têm feito até os tempos modernos. Mas obtendo ovinos dos europeus, olha o processo de aculturação aqui, né? Obtendo ovinos dos europeus, os navarro são hoje mais pastoreadores, vivendo espalhados com seus rebanhos em grupos de famílias. Dois conceitos europeus aqui, pastoreio e a noção de família, que vem do processo do quê? Não fosse o convívio com o europeu, não haveria esse costume. Então, há um intercâmbio cultural, o que demonstra o quê? In fact, Lara is showing us the process of cultural learning, the contact of the Aborigine tribes with the Europeans brought learning for both parts. Of course, this learning is unequal because power relations are unequal. They are asymmetrical, okay? But one learns from the other. One acquires resources from the other. Continuando a leitura. O espírito criador do homem pode assim envolver... Oops, sorry. My keyboard is too close. O espírito criador do homem pode assim envolver três alternativas culturais bem diferentes: apanha de víveres, cultivo e pastoreio. No mesmo ambiente natural, ok? In the same geography, no mesmo ambiente natural, de sorte que não foram fatores de habitat que proporcionaram a determinante principal. And this word is important, the main determinant. It does not mean that the environment does not contribute, but it's not the main determinant. Posteriormente, no mesmo habitat, colonizadores americanos tiveram que criar outros sistemas de vida baseados na pecuária, na agricultura irrigada e na urbanização. Okay? And finally, a domestic example of the Xinguans and Caiabi tribes in Brazil, in page 23. Still in page 23, he says that, I think it's in page 23, yes. O terceiro exemplo pode ser encontrado no interior de nosso país, dentro dos limites do Parque Nacional do Xingu. Os xinguanos, propriamente ditos, Camaiurá, Calapalo, Trumai, Uaurá, desprezam toda a reserva de proteínas existentes nos grandes mamíferos, cuja caça lhes é interditada por motivos culturais, such as in India, the cattle is not for consuming meat, yeah? E se dedicam mais intensamente à pesca de aves. Perdão, a pesca de aves é bom, né? A pesca e caça de aves. Os caiabi, que habitam o norte do parque, são excelentes caçadores e preferem justamente mamíferos de grande porte, como a anta, o veado, o catitu e etc. So in the same environment, you have two different tribes. One hunts, the other doesn't. One takes seeds and essentially hunts, and the other one raises animals. You see the difference? So all of these different outputs are given to the same input, I mean, to the same weather input, to the same environment, to the same physical environment. So you mentioned these examples, I think. So what does Laraya want to demonstrate when he does such kind of comparisons? He says in page 21, a partir de 1920, antropólogos como Boas, Whistler, Kreber, entre outros, refutaram esse tipo de determinismo, qual seja o geográfico, e demonstraram que existe uma limitação. Não é que não exista influência, mas existe uma limitação na influência geográfica sobre os fatores culturais. E mais, que é possível e comum existir uma grande diversidade cultural localizada em um mesmo tipo de ambiente físico. Now, why is it important for us as English professionals of the English language, to know that geography, that the weather does not determine culture? Maybe to break some myths about North Americans, about British, about Australians, about Canadians, especially those from the North. Australians are more are not so stereotyped, but those from the North, that they are too formal, too cold, and so on, because they are born in a certain weather or as a certain region, and they eat like this or like that, because they eat what they have available too. Okay, so if other repertoire is made available, maybe they will produce different outputs to the same kind of input. This is what anthropology says. So it's not guaranteed that if you give the same environment to two different communities, they will produce exactly the same practical solutions to live in this land. So,
Professor,
Laraya, yes.
também pode trazer esse conceito para dentro de sala de aula, né? Às vezes, eles estão na mesma sala com as mesmas condições, digamos, de sala, né? As mesmas condições de ambiente lá dentro, mas podem ter diferentes interpretações sobre a aula, diferentes aprendizados, certo?
Isso é Paulo Freire, né? O Paulo Freire fala exatamente dessa questão de como existe uma diferença entre alfabetizar uma criança, por exemplo, que está habituada ao convívio no meio rural e no meio urbano, né? Você tratar de temas significativos, ou mesmo crianças com diferentes aportes familiares, seja ele religioso, cultural, religioso é cultural, né? Seja ele religioso ou étnico ou de qualquer outra natureza, né? Existem performances diferentes, né, para pessoas diferentes. E na mesma sala de aula a gente pode ter isso sim, né, extrapolando do conceito de geografia, de cultura, para um conceito de diversidade cultural, ainda mais num país como o Brasil, que, né, é bem diverso, tem correntes migratórias para um lado, para outro, recebeu muito imigrante, isso é sim determinante, né. Então, para questionar essa ideia do determinismo geográfico, o Laraya vai afirmar na página 24. Não é possível admitir a ideia do determinismo geográfico, ou seja, a admissão da ação mecânica das forças naturais sobre uma humanidade puramente receptiva. Does he mean that nature is not relevant? Take this first.
It's relevant.
It is, but it's not the only factor. It's not mechanic. It's not predictable. Ok? It's not predictable. A posição da moderna antropologia é que a cultura age seletivamente e não casualmente sobre o seu meio ambiente, explorando determinadas possibilidades e limites ao desenvolvimento para o qual as forças decisivas estão na própria cultura e na história da cultura. That is, you will find solutions for certain physical settings according to what you learned from your community. Okay, so you will take the history of your community forward, and you will find solutions based on what was found before. And some other community may find different solutions. Like, this is a very good questioning for the notion of evolution, because the first scientists to talk about evolution had a kind of naive conception of evolution as something linear. And then an African so-called tribe by them, if had gone through the same historical processes, the same cultural processes that Europe did, then they would develop the same way. That's not true. We may face similar natural events, but produce different ways of evolving. Evolution is not about getting better. It's about being different. It's about finding different answers to similar problems. Okay, so it's not guaranteed that if I give have you read My Fair Lady? Já ouviram falar desse romance, My Fair Lady?
Sim.
Acho que o Chespirito fez até uma adaptação interessante no Chapolin. O que o My Fair Lady tenta demonstrar? Vocês lembram da história?
Acho que é o preconceito que tem com a moça,
Uhum.
com a protagonista.
Do jeito que ela fala.
Oi? Pelo jeito que ela fala, mas aí qual é a solução encontrada? Ela recebe
Tentar fazer com que ela fale de um jeito que eles consideram normal.
Isso, ela recebe um processo educacional semelhante ao da aristocracia. Deixa eu só ligar meu ventilador aqui, eu tô quase morrendo. Semelhante ao da aristocracia, de modo que é como se ali tem uma ilusão, né, uma ilusão da elite britânica de que, submetendo toda a sociedade aos mesmos processos que a elite passa, essa pessoa se tornaria necessariamente uma pessoa da elite. Pode ser, mas outros fatores contribuem, né? Não é só o processo de educação formal, né? The European had this notion that if you submit some communities to the same historical processes, to the same religion, for example, this happened in Brazil. If you submit them to the same religion, if you turn them into Christians, then they would produce the same kind of output that we Europeans do. This may not be true all the time. This may work sometimes, but not all the time, okay? So, Laraya says that a posição da moderna antropologia, we have read this. So, a cultura age seletivamente. What does that mean? It is culture that will determine how we will respond to problems. Okay? If we didn't have the need to fly, if we didn't have the need to interact with other nations that are far away from us, and we didn't have the need to fly, we would probably have never invented the plane or the navigations, for example. Why did the navigations come out? Because there was a need of trade. with the East. So there is a cultural need that will prompt this evolution. And evolution is not getting better or getting worse. It's just being different, producing answers, producing responses to natural and cultural inputs. So similar environments and distinct culture will produce different answers, okay? The same will happen in all the other examples that Laraya brings us, okay? So in chapter 3, Laraya will present us a bit of the historical background of the concept of culture. Now, he will tell the story on how anthropology has arisen as a science. He says that in 1871, Edward Tyler split the notion of culture into two words. The first one from German Kultur, with this graphic representation, which means the cultural aspects of a people, the practices, cultural practices. And the second word would be civilization. Now, culture is more intuitive, as a set of practices that we learn at home in the community, and civilization more related to formal material achievements, to formal knowledge, and so on. And he will say that the English word culture gives us an account for both definitions in Tyler's conception. Such definition, taken in its ethnographic sense, means every set of practices and knowledge that includes beliefs, art, morals, laws, habits, or any other capacity acquired by men and women as a member of society. Okay, so in German we had these two words. In English we only have one. Now think of the word culture, and let's go back, who was my student in morphosyntax. What other words can you form out of the root cult? Think of the word culture. We have a suffix, ure, culture. What other words in English can you come up with cult? Or em português, cultura. Pega o radical cult. Que outras palavras vocês conseguem criar com isso?
Cultivating.
Cultivating, so it should be preserved. It should be inherited and passed on. So you learn culture and you pass culture, you transmit culture. That's the idea of modern anthropology. Culture is all about learning, preserving, conserving, and of course, when you have cultural contact, such as we have with the North, we as South Americans are in touch with the nations of Europe and with the United States. What is the tendency? That cultures merge, especially in a globalized world. Now, I know that globalization is now under check because globalization didn't work necessarily the way that the Europeans and the Americans expected it to. So China has emerged as a powerful nation, and there are some questionings in this new conservative movements on the notion of globalization. They are considering if it's really good or not. The election of Donald Trump was a kind of movement backwards from part of the United States to close itself to its own culture, to its own internal problems. But we have a tendency of globalization favored by the web, favored by all the technologies of information and communication. Now, when we get in touch among cultures, when I get in touch with a Canadian or with an English person, is this contact symmetrical? I mean, is it, commas, inverted commas, fair? Considering a country like, for example, let's not take the case of Brazil. Let's take the case of a nation such as an African nation from Ghana, a contact between a North American and a Ghana citizen, would it produce the same gain for both? What do you think? Is the cultural contact beneficial for both?
Eu acho que um vai querer dominar o outro, ou um vai querer ser melhor que o outro, talvez.
Maybe because we live in a capitalist system in which competition is one of the cornerstones, maybe. Well, Michel Foucault will always say that relations of power are always asymmetrical. They are not equal. There's no equality in cultural contact because cultures are different. And if there is cultural difference, there will be difference in the ways these cultures are valued in hegemonic society. And the hegemony of society nowadays, we know, comes from the United States and Europe. Okay, so when we produce cultural contact, we should be aware that we are producing somehow cultural colonization. And I think it's really important for us as English professionals have a decolonized mind. What is the, I mean, what is the main kind of perspective that you had of the English language when you decided to study it? Why did you decide to study English? Or what do people say about learning English? What is its relevance in a
It
nation
is
such as Brazil? It is
easy.
easy. Is it?
I think no, but I think we learn English because we want to talk with people around the world. Because all world talks English, and it's the main language in the business, right?
Okay, let's do a kind of brainstorm here. Just a moment. So let me take notes. It's easy. Supposedly. Okay, it's true that this is a stereotype about English. It's international. What else? Reasons. Think of yourselves. Why did I decide to study English? What has influenced me to study English? Think of yourselves.
Basically, every single movie that we all see,
Movies. Okay, what else?
music,
Some people mentioned trade. What else? So we learn English because it's easy. Well, maybe the person that says that English is easy has never had a class on the subjunctive in English. English is sometimes easy. Sometimes it's more difficult than Portuguese. What is easy? Portuguese is easy for me because I'm learned speaking it. I'm born speaking it. Everybody around me speaks it. For me, it's obvious. One of the worst experiences I had was as a Portuguese teacher for foreigners who spoke English, because they would never understand why did we have so many inflections in verb tenses. On the other hand, we see Brazilians with lots of difficulty to learn English because they can never understand some expressions such as, why is the answer for thank you, you're welcome? There's nothing to do, obrigado, bem-vindo. You see, this is the movement of strangeness that we have in the first contact with the language. Estranhamento. Afinal de contas, essa língua é estrangeira. English is international. Well, David Crystal, which is the next text you are going to read, will show us some reasons why English is international. But was it always international? Go to the documentary you have watched. Was English always a language of prestige?
Não, começou com uma tribo bem pequena e aí foi se espalhando conforme eles foram indo por aí, tipo assim.
What's the story behind the rise of English? How has English gained importance along history, according to the documentary?
After the Second War, but it already had some relevance after the independence.
Yeah, and before English, what was the so-called international language, if there was one? What are the languages of the United Nations?
English.
And
French.
French, yes. I think English now is predominant, but before they had similar importance. Now, was there something called a kind of universal language or at least international language before English? Was English influenced by some other language?
Germany. German
Mhm.
English.
Yeah, like English is a kind of Germanic language, so it has some influence. The lexicon of German, some items in the lexicon of German are also found in English, uh, and the grammar of English. Which language helped English shape a grammar? Which language helped most European languages to shape a grammar? What is the grammatical standard?
Latin.
Latin, the language of clerical activities. So, in nations where the church had a lot of importance and all the church spoke Latin, the scholars had Latin as a role model when they theorized, when they prescribed, the word is to prescribe grammatical rules. Grammar is not natural. Grammar, the way we know it, hardcore grammar, is prescription. It's do like this, do like that. Why? Well, because Latin language shows us that this is an adverb, this is a verb, this is a noun, a pronoun. Basically, Latin was the role model for most grammars of most European languages. That's why we call all these languages Indo-European, because they derive from Latin and they take it as a model of language beauty, perfection, and so on. Okay, so Latin was an international language before. If you take the times of the Roman Empire, and why did Latin lose importance? When did Latin decline?
When the church declined it too.
Yeah, the decline of a nation implies the decline of its language. The rise of a nation implies or tends to imply the rise of its language. The same has happened to English, and that's why nowadays the most taught variety of English is North American English, because after World War II, the United States has gained trade importance and cultural importance. Okay, with music, with movies, with literature, with theater plays, and so on. Now with the technologies of information and communication, you see. So back here to the slides. So back to the concept of culture. Tyler will say that culture is not born with us. It's not innate. It's learning. It's all about learning. John Locke, quoting John Locke, he said, a mente humana não é mais do que uma caixa vazia. Remember the example of the child Take an Aborigine child to the United States, and this child will be a North American. Take an American child to Sertão do Ceará, this child will be Cearense. If it's raised at that setting with those kinds of practice. If you raise someone in the countryside planting and growing animals, this person will be an agriculture. So for Locke, each society has its own values and practices and tends to condemn those which are strange to them. And that's why we call English língua estrangeira. Estrangeiro de estranho, de diferente, aquilo que causa espanto. We use in English, we have the term foreign, from the outside. I like to explore this root, estrangeiro, estranho, to talk about the feeling that we have the first time we get inside an English classroom. How did you feel the first time you entered your English class? Personal reports here. What was the feeling you had? Did your teacher speak only English?
No.
No. Well, mine did, and it was horrible for me because I didn't understand a word. I had no right to speak because I had no vocabulary, so I had to listen. Now, what do you think is the tendency now? We have English teachers here, don't we? Who is an English teacher here?
Yes.
Yes.
Girls, do you teach basic one only in English?
No,
Why not?
No.
because
Because
it's their first contact with this language.
Mm.
I try to make a mix, you know, some in the class moment is in English, but in the beginning and in the end is in Portuguese.
Mm.
Some important information I give in Portuguese.
Important information, I mean the directions, how to act, what they are supposed to do or not.
Yeah.
You know, this is a new tendency, don't you? Well, in the 60s, and I researched on this when I was in my equivalent to TCC, there were methodologies that said that the mother tongue should be avoided. There are methods like the audiolingual method or the repetition method in which the mother tongue is considered to be undesirable because it supposedly causes interference in pronunciation. So you see, even teaching is a matter of tendencies. It's a matter of fashions. It's a matter of beliefs that we construct inside and outside the academy, inside and outside the classroom. Nowadays, I tend to agree with you that we have to bring the mother tongue to the very first classes. But when I was a professional in language institutes, I was punished when I spoke Portuguese. And the directors used to attend my classes and say, you speak too much Portuguese. Don't do that. You see? So these are tendencies. Now, how fair is it to expose someone to something that is strange and taking away his or her own language? As we know, language is part of our identity. If you take away someone's language and you don't replace it with another, this person does not have an identity at all to speak. A
It's a
position.
way to say that it's
Yes.
a way to say that your first identity isn't important here. Just the others one who
And it's
speaks
all a,
this language
and it's all a
is
matter
important.
of exerting power. The one that has the language has the power.
I think it also creates kind of like,
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I think this type of learning of teaching also creates a internal like hierarchy between students
Mm-hmm.
because students then knows English and speak up more. They're invited to speak up more. And the ones that don't, they just don't speak.
Yeah,
It happened to me because I always was really good English. I was invited to speak up more and didn't really want to because the point of having an English class is for people to learn English, not for me to exercise something that I'm already pretty good at. So I would always like call other students in and help them with their vocabulary when I realized that this was a type of teaching that was being made, that was
yeah.
being done.
Your audio has some cut downs, but I think I got it when you talk about hierarchy. Now
Yeah,
let me
exactly.
tell you, the audiolingual method comes from the army. The tradition of the audiolingual method is developed inside the American army. So it's natural that in the army, hierarchy is taken for granted. Uh, when I used to be a teacher in audiolingual method, most of the English that we heard in the classroom came from tapes or CDs. Or the teacher, when the teacher is not a native speaker of English, the teacher almost does not speak. We had a lesson plan with the questions we were supposed to ask. This lesson plan was not ours. It came from the franchising headquarters, and we were supposed to ask those questions based on vocabulary that students already knew, and then introducing new vocabulary with the old vocabulary. It's really a kind of structuralist method that consider the mother tongue as something to be avoided. Now, it's not the tendency anymore with the advent of communicative approach, but it's still a leading method in the market, believe me. So this old way of thinking and this supposedly new, not so new because it comes from the 60s, communicative approaches from the 60s way of teaching, they coexist in the market even nowadays. Okay, going back to the notions of culture, so that's why it's so important to know about cultural differences, about linguistic differences, and about this feeling of strangeness that we have. As Locke points out, each society will consider its own values and practice as natural, and the others are unnatural, strange, different, surprising, and so on. Jacques Turgot will tell us that culture is the capacity for retention, communication, and transmission of learned ideas. He talks about erudite learned ideas. Laraya says that if you accept the term erudite, then we have a definition equivalent to that definition that Malinowski, which is an anthropologist, and White provide for culture. The capacity that we have to retain, communicate, and transmit ideas. Not only erudite, although Jacques Turgot puts the word erudite ideas. Okay? Why do you think Malinowski and White dropped the word erudite? They do not consider only erudite ideas as culture. What does it tell you about the perspective that Turgot had of culture and the perspective of Malinowski? What is music, for example? It's just Chopin and Beethoven, or maybe Mozart? What is the
No,
difference of? Mhm. So this is the idea. When we talk about culture as the transmission, retention, and uh, transmission, communication, and retention of erudite ideas, we are excluding certain populations from culture. So they don't have culture. Now, when we drop erudite from this construction, we are claiming that everybody has a culture. Everyone that produces sound waves is producing music. I may not like that kind of music, but that's music. I do not like funk, but I cannot say it's not music. Um, in European culture, basically music is what is based on scales. Now, African music does not have the same notion of musical scales that European musicians do, but it's music. You see, this is a kind of elite. Jacques Turgot is sticking to a kind of elite conception of culture, whereas Malinowski and White are trying to extend this notion to all populations. Everybody has culture. Every set of people that live together as a community have a culture. About culture, Rousseau will define it as our ability to learn as something distinctive from chimpanzees and orangutans. So, what is the difference between mankind and animals? Basically, we have what that they do not? We have an ability to learn. Do you think animals do not have an ability to learn?
I think they have,
Yeah,
but I
my dog
think
does not
they can.
pee. My dog does not pee inside
I,
the house. What's the
I think
difference?
they don't have the capacity of reflection, reflect about some mistake or about some order, I think.
Well, I think Alonso has a capacity of reflection. When he does something wrong, he looks at me with a different look. But this is not reflection. I got your point. What they
Well,
don't have
Thank you.
is the ability to transmit.
yeah,
So,
I was saying this because I really read 2001, and this was what a point that the other animals could transmit their knowledge to each other.
yeah, they may transmit instinct, some kind of responses to the environment. But for example, if I teach my dog not to pee in the house, it's not guaranteed. In fact, it's guaranteed that his offspring, if he has baby dogs, these baby dogs will have to learn everything again from me, not from their biological father. You see? So they do not have the ability to transmit and to transmit knowledge. What do we have to do? How do we transmit knowledge?
By the
Right?
language.
Yeah, language. This is the crucial point for culture. Okay. So if you have culture, you have to transmit it. How do you transmit it? You have to think about it. And how do you think about it? With language, with a complex system of arbitrary signals, as using Saussurian terms. So what really makes us different from the chimpanzees is language, the capacity of using phonemes, words, to make, by means of this arbitrary set of signals, portrait reality, to make a portrait, to report reality. Okay. So after these considerations of Tyler and the junction of the idea of culture and civilization in the German language, the concept of culture has gained shape and nuances. So in 1871, Tyler presents a definition of culture as all that is learned by man and does not depend on genetic transmission. And again, to be learned, we need language. And when I mean language, I do not mean only spoken language, of course. Okay. So everything that is learned is culture. Okay. According to Tyler's definition. And then after some time, I'll move a little faster now. Clifford Geertz presents us with a new contraction and simplification of the concept of culture, because everybody was making a theory on culture. It was necessary to make it more homogeneous. Clifford Geertz presents us with this new concept, that would be necessary to make it a more specialized and powerful instrument in the hands of anthropologists, given the complexity of the term. So he will talk about the superhuman. What is the superhuman according to Clifford Geertz? He says that what makes us different from all the other living species on Earth is our capacity to create and to go beyond our natural apparatus. What does he mean by that? Can mankind fly? Can we fly? I mean, naturally.
No.
But can we fly actually? Can we
We
actually
found
fly?
a way to fly.
That's it, which is not limited to our body. We created tools, we created devices that transpose our natural capability of doing some activities. This has started with our ancestor species when they started developing tools out of stone by breaking stone and building tools like hammers, like knives, or I don't know in English. O princípio da alavanca, acho que é a ferramenta mais antiga do mundo. Fire, how to make a fire. We developed the technology. So when people talk about technology, we are normally used to think of technology as this kind of mediation that we are using to have a class, a computer, a smartphone. But technology is associated to the history of civilization. There wouldn't be a civilization if there was no technology, a technique to do things that were before impossible to be done. For example, it was impossible to fly. It was impossible to go overseas, but we had the ability to manipulate nature, to cut down a tree and build a chair. You see? So let's read a passage from Laraya in which he will establish this distinction between what is natural and what is human. Page 28 and 29 of my edition here. So Laraya says at the last paragraph of page 28, the 1, 2, 3 paragraphs before the end of the chapter, the end of chapter 3. O anjo caído, and when he means anjo caído, he means the human being, foi diferenciado dos demais animais por ter ao seu dispor duas notáveis propriedades: a possibilidade da comunicação oral e a capacidade de fabricação de instrumentos capazes de tornar mais eficiente o seu aparato biológico. Por que ele fala em anjo caído? Qual é a explicação teológica para a origem humana? Sobretudo a cristã.
Deus criou o mundo.
E quem é o homem?
A imagem e semelhança de Deus.
Agora pensa o quão duro é para uma sociedade que acredita piamente nisso, se vê, e até hoje é difícil para algumas pessoas aceitar isso, se vê nada mais, nada menos do que um primata um pouco mais evoluído. Um animal com uma capacidade comunicativa, né? Isso gerou resistência nas comunidades mais atreladas à origem humana como origem divina. O homem foi recolocado de um status quase divino, quase um deus, né? Até porque ele se considera, né, do ponto de vista cristão, a imagem e semelhança de Deus, como um igual aos animais, com uma pequena diferença. Ele tem linguagem, ele tem capacidade de aprendizado, né? É por isso que ele fala aqui num anjo caído, né? Alguém que perdeu o status de semidivindade para entrar na natureza, mas ao mesmo tempo saiu dela justamente por essa capacidade de cultura. Diz ele, mas estas duas propriedades permitem uma afirmação mais ampla. O homem é o único ser possuidor de cultura. Em suma, a nossa espécie tinha conseguido, no decorrer de sua evolução, estabelecer uma distinção de gênero e não apenas de grau em relação aos demais seres vivos. Os fundadores da nossa ciência, ou seja, da antropologia, através dessa explicação tinham repetido a temática quase universal dos mitos de origem, pois a maioria destes preocupa-se muito mais em explicar a separação da cultura da natureza do que com as especulações de ordem cosmogônica. Vamos lá. When does mankind exist, according to the biblical explanation, when did man had to work? I mean, to manipulate nature in order to survive. Everything was given. What happened that mankind had to work and to raise animals or collect fruits or develop technologies? When did it happen?
When he ate the prohibited fruit.
Yeah. And what was the name of that fruit? Eu não sei se
The
todas as
the fruit of the good and evil.
The fruit of good and evil. Na tradução brasileira, eu acho que, sobretudo, a que os protestantes usam, está muito interessante a tradução, porque fala assim, fruto do conhecimento do bem e do mal. Não sei se vocês já viram traduções nesse sentido, né? Tá lá em Gênesis, fala que o homem, a ele era vedado o fruto do conhecimento, né? Do bem e do mal. The good and evil. Quando o homem come esse fruto, o que é que ele começa a estabelecer? Vamos tentar aqui conciliar a metáfora, né? A metáfora teológica com o que diz a antropologia. O que nos torna mesmo diferente dos animais? A capacidade de acumular cultura. A cultura vai nos dizer o que é certo e o que é errado. Vocês acham que o tigre sente culpa de caçar a corça?
Não.
De devorar, de voar no pescoço dela? Por outro lado, ele caça para si mais corças do que pode comer?
Não.
Que é uma noção humana. E não, eu não diria humana, é uma noção ocidental, eu diria, ou da civilização ocidental. Nas tribos indígenas não se tem essa noção de acúmulo, né? Daí os estereótipos de que o maranhense é preguiçoso porque é a herança indígena que não faz ele ter ambição de querer acumular. Tudo estereótipo, né? Sempre eurocêntrico, né? O que eu quero dizer com isso? A ideia de comer do fruto do conhecimento do bem e do mal pode, com alguma boa vontade, ser relacionada à própria noção de civilização do momento em que nós deixamos de ser Homo erectus e nos tornamos Homo sapiens. Sapiens significa o que mesmo?
Que pensa.
Que pensa, que tem um saber sobre. Você sai da natureza, do seu estado natural, né? E isso é relatado na Bíblia, né? Deus, acho que no ato da condenação, fala: agora viverás do suor do teu rosto, alguma coisa assim, né? Faz tempo que eu não leio a passagem, mas é algo por aí. Ou seja, você sai do estado natural de sobrevivência, com base nos recursos que já estão ali disponíveis, e vai começar a manipular a natureza. O homem deixa de ser parte, ele passa a ser agente, manipulador daquela natureza. É nesse sentido que o Laraia vai falar nessa noção do anjo caído, do castigo, né? Que é o próprio castigo e é o próprio conhecimento, né? Que vai nos fazer manipular o ambiente de acordo com necessidades que surgem, que não são mais naturais. Vivíamos
Outra
muito
coisa
bem.
também.
Vivíamos muito bem sem, não vivíamos? Vocês acho que não se lembram, já nasceram com um na mão. Sim, pode falar, querida.
Outra coisa também que fala na Bíblia que eu acho que difere a gente dos animais é o fato da gente, por exemplo, logo quando Adão e Eva comeram do fruto, eles viram que estavam nus. E os animais não percebem isso também.
Perceber que está nu, ou seja, criar os seus tabus. Tabus que são culturais, né? Nas tribos indígenas, se anda nu ou seminu sem nenhum tipo de constrangimento, né? Não há o constrangimento. O contato do homem branco com o indígena começou a trazer para o indígena também esse constrangimento, né? O processo de colonização religiosa, o processo de colonização cultural traz junto a ideia de vergonha, de pecado, tanto que o caminho se refere às genitálias como vergonhas, né? Essa ideia de estar nu, essa ideia da culpa, né? A culpa pelo pecado original, né? O conhecimento do bem e do mal que me leva a entender, olha, se eu der uma porrada no meu semelhante, provavelmente ele vai querer revidar, né? Se eu desenvolver aqui essa machadinha, eu posso usar ela para derrubar uma planta, ou posso usá-la para matar meu semelhante. Existe o bem, existe o mal, existe o certo, existe o errado. Essas dicotomias vão fundamentar todo o comportamento humano, o que é certo, o que é errado. E aí os primeiros sistemas jurídicos, né? As primeiras formas de punição, de controle, né? Sobre as quais o Foucault vai falar, né? A questão da punição, da vigilância, do controle. Tudo isso pode ser relacionado, eu disse, com alguma boa vontade, com algum laicismo na leitura bíblica, lendo ela de um ponto de vista metafórico, né? E lendo também a antropologia com alguma boa vontade relacionada, você pode estabelecer aí um paralelo de que Gênesis trata, sim, né, da origem do homem tal como ele é conhecido, da origem do homem como Homo sapiens, como homem civilizado. Ali está descrito o processo de civilização, claro, se você não olhar para Adão e Eva como a pessoinha Adão e Eva, mas como um elemento representativo metafórico do processo civilizatório, né? Isso envolve boa vontade, desprendimento de alguns tabus religiosos e também de alguns tabus científicos, né? Porque eu costumo dizer que é preciso conciliar, né? Aquele que em nada crê está ferrado, né? Está ferrado, vai sofrer nesse mundo. Aquele que também em tudo crê tende a ser uma presa fácil de eventuais pessoas mal intencionadas e manipuladoras. Então, o equilíbrio é sempre um caminho interessante. Bom, indo adiante, né? No desenvolvimento do conceito de cultura. So the first formulation of an anthropological concept of culture belongs to Tyler. He tried to show the possibility of studying culture by systematically investigating the regularities among different cultures and objectively positioning them into a scale. Now look at the positivistic background of Tyler and take a look if it does not have something to do with Saussure, with what Saussure did to language. The same way Saussure was interested in the systematic aspects of language and establishing language comparison, English, French, German, Portuguese, Spanish, and tribe languages, and showing that all these languages had some set of rules that regulated discrete units that were arbitrary. I'm sticking to Saussurian terms. The same way Tyler wanted to show cultural differences as part of a regularity. Everybody has culture, but some cultures react somehow, some others somehow differently. And there was a tendency to establish standards of inferiority and superiority. So we have a scientific and generalistic approach that had a strong bias permeated by positivism. Now, what was the positivistic ideology that was so dominant, especially at the end of the 1880s and the beginning of the 1990s? What were the fundamentals of positivism? Regularity, the notion of regularity, the possibility of science. What is science according to the positivistic point of view? Science is what can be proved. And to prove a scientific assertion, I have to take it to the lab, do experiments, and repeat them to exhaustion, and acquire the same results. That's let's think of what Saussure wanted. Saussure wanted to turn linguistics into a science. Before Saussure, we had kind of primitive linguistics, let's say, non-scientific linguistics. To study linguistics from the scientific perspective, what did he have to do? He had to make choices. What were these choices? He had to establish some dichotomies. What were them? The first one, langue versus
Linguagem, língua e linguagem.
That in French we have language and parole. Language as the system, parole as the individual realization of it. Which one did he choose? The system or the individual use of the system?
The system.
The system, because the system is generic. And positivism praises what is generic, what is universal, what is regular, what is objective. Every time we try to write a paper, we try to be the more objective we can. We avoid subjectivity, isn't it? This is what academic writing manuals always tell us to do. Be objective. Go straight to the point. Of course, we have a resistance to that inside the academy, trying to prove that positivism is not the only way to do research, but we have to play the game. We have to incorporate some of the positivistic way of writing to prove that positivism is not the only way. I like to quote the philosopher Marcondes Falcão Maia, o humorista. Ele diz que é provar por A mais B que A mais B não prova nada. A gente acaba, na análise do discurso, a gente tem muito esse dilema, a gente acaba sendo positivista para questionar a própria forma positivista como a ciência se estrutura. A gente acaba sendo objetivo para defender noções linguísticas que valorizam a subjetividade, que valorizam a gente acaba tendo que mostrar uma consciência do arsenal teórico que a gente manipula para tentar mostrar a importância do inconsciente na linguagem. Veja o dilema com o qual a gente está deparado, né? Na página 30, 31, deixa eu ver aqui a citação que eu quero mostrar para vocês. Olha só. No terceiro parágrafo do quarto capítulo, depois da citação. Buscando apoio nas ciências naturais, esse era o modelo de ciência, né? Quando falamos em ciências naturais, falamos sobretudo da física, da matemática e da biologia que deriva de Darwin, né? Buscando apoio nas ciências naturais, pois considera a cultura como um fenômeno natural, Taylor escreve em seguida: nossos investigadores modernos nas ciências da natureza inorgânica tendem a reconhecer dentro e fora de seu campo especial de trabalho a unidade da natureza e a permanência de suas leis. Ou seja, a natureza é a mesma. As leis são as mesmas. A definida sequência de causa e efeito através da qual depende cada fato. Apoiam firmemente a doutrina pitagoriana da ordem no cosmo universal. Olha aqui um monte de termo positivista. Ordem, universo, universalidade. Afirmam, como Aristóteles, que a natureza não é constituída de episódios incoerentes, como uma má tragédia. Concordam com Leibniz no que ele chamou de meu axioma, que a natureza nunca age por saltos, tanto como em seu grande princípio, comumente pouco utilizado, de que nada acontece sem suficiente razão. Hoje a gente sabe que a própria física, né, ela não considera essa ideia de ordem como um axioma absoluto, né? Uma das principais teorias que voga na física moderna é a teoria do caos, né? Que o universo nada mais é do que um grão de caos, mas naquela época, começo do século, fim do século XIX, começo do XX, a ideia de ordem era muito forte. Qual é o lema, digamos assim, se vocês tivessem que resumir o positivismo em um símbolo nacional brasileiro, em qual vocês resumiriam? Deus acima de tudo, Brasil acima de todos? Não. Mas é quase isso.
A bandeira.
Progresso.
Isso. A ideia de que para ter progresso tem que ter ordem. Se você quer ser professor da Universidade Federal, você tem então que terminar sua graduação, fazer um bom TCC, fazer um mestrado, fazer um doutorado, passar no concurso. Tem todo um ritual ordenado, né, que vai te levar ao progresso, que vai te levar ao êxito, que vai te levar à busca de uma verdade e à prova dessa verdade. Entende? A academia é toda estruturada dentro dos princípios positivistas, né? E a nossa ciência, portanto, ela é herdeira, mesmo os pós-estruturalistas, mesmo aqueles que questionam o positivismo, são herdeiros dessa tradição. Isso vale também para a ideia de cultura, para a ideia de antropologia, onde eu quero chegar. As primeiras noções da antropologia que acabava de surgir era de que era possível comparar culturas, botá-las numa escala de evolução, que se há uma ordem e se a natureza não age por acaso, então, se determinada civilização ainda não é tão evoluída como a minha, é porque a natureza ainda não terminou de agir sobre ela. É isso que nós chamamos de etno. Quem acerta? Quem lembra? Laraia fala. Etnocentrismo. É uma postura etnocêntrica. Eu meço o outro sempre a partir da régua da minha própria história. Isso vai mudar com a chegada do particularismo histórico, que vai dizer, não, peraí, a história age de maneira diferente para diferentes comunidades. Da mesma maneira que a gente viu no determinismo geográfico, que o ambiente influencia de maneira diferente diferentes comunidades, a história não necessariamente vai se repetir. Karl Marx, quando teorizou sobre uma revolução comunista, não previu o que ia ser na Rússia. Onde é que ele achou que seria? Alguém leu o manifesto?
Alemanha.
Na Alemanha. Por quê? Porque ele presumia que uma revolução comunista tinha como pré-requisito um capitalismo industrial altamente desenvolvido. Mas onde que se deu efetivamente a revolução comunista? Numa Rússia, extremamente agrária, de natureza quase que ainda feudal. Por quê? Porque a história não age de maneira previsível. A Revolução Russa é uma demonstração de que a história não necessariamente obedece ao modelo científico positivista de que faça A, B e C para chegar a D. A história pode sim operar com surpresas, com o imprevisível, com o imponderável. Mas esse é o background da antropologia que surge com Taylor. So, the human presumption of superiority caused much resistance to the idea of studying human behavior as governed by the same natural laws governing the winds and the animals. This is basically the religious, the theological resistance to the idea that we are just primates that have evolved, okay? Much of this is due to the supposed holy nature of mankind, as we have discussed, the religious practices, the religious beliefs, especially the concept of free will from Christianism. So we had a clash between science and religion, which is still available for us to observe. We still have this dispute over the holy nature of man and the scientific explanation for our evolution. What Taylor proposes in ancient anthropology is a study on the equality of human nature through a study of the races of the same degree of civilization. Now, what is the problem when I talk about the same degree of civilization? I assume that there are degrees of civilization. So some people are more civilized than others. And what does it mean to be civilized? And how can civilization be measured? Basically, the Europeans were the standard, and the savage tribes were considered non-civilized. Include here the Nordics, for example, which are also Europeans, but kind of less evolved Europeans. And all other forms of human civilization would fit within these two extremes. So let's put it this way. Inglês ou alemão é o exemplo de civilização. Civilizado é quem tem ciência, quem tem universidades, é quem tem escritos acadêmicos, uma música erudita, uma literatura consolidada. E o que é o não civilizado? É quem não tem nada disso. E o resto? Põe numa escala aí. Quem tem alguma literatura, quem tem alguma forma de escrita, por exemplo, o egípcio, né? Você vai pôr o egípcio em qual padrão de civilização? Teoricamente, ele estaria menos evoluído que o europeu moderno. Um asteca. No entanto, a tecnologia de irrigação, sabe-se hoje que os astecas dominavam muito melhor do que os europeus o faziam na Idade Média. Então, é um conceito problemático, mas é assim que surge uma antropologia que ainda é etnocêntrica. Tá? Qual é o oposto de etnocêntrico? Pelo que vocês leram do Laraia? O oposto da postura etnocêntrica é a postura etnográfica. O que difere uma postura etnocêntrica de fazer uma etnografia? O que seria um trabalho etnográfico?
Eu acho que estudar as culturas sem julgá-las, ou então sem colocar um padrão nelas.
Basicamente, é por aí. Basicamente, a diferença, por exemplo, em linguística, entre prescritivismo e descritivismo. O que é uma linguística prescritiva? Vamos lá na sociolinguística, vamos lá no Marcos Banho. O que é linguística prescritiva? Um exemplo de linguística prescritiva.
Eu acho que linguística prescritiva é aquela que impõe o jeito que a gente tem que falar. Então,
fala direito.
Isso.
Fala direito, não é para mim fazer, é para eu fazer. Mas quem disse, né? Se eu falo para mim, todo mundo fala para mim na minha comunidade, dá isso aqui para mim usar e todo mundo entende, beleza, né? A descritiva vai trabalhar com o fato como ele é. Vai descrevê-lo, vai dizer em quantas ocorrências aquilo existe, por que aquilo ocorre, vai tentar explicar por que certos fonemas são reduzidos, desaparecem, outros surgem, as diferenças de pronúncia, as diferenças no léxico, no sintático, sem se preocupar em estabelecer um juízo de valor. Isso é descritivo. A etnografia, em termos de descrição cultural, em termos de teoria cultural, é como se fosse uma descrição cultural feita de dentro. Você vai para dentro de uma determinada cultura, né? Você mergulha nessa cultura para poder melhor falar sobre ela. O etnocentrismo está muito mais para aquela ilusão de que é possível se retirar do objeto, de que é possível olhar o objeto de fora, como o biólogo que olha a célula do microscópio, que põe o olho e vê, isso é uma célula. Lembra do exemplo que eu dei do astronauta russo? Meu Deus, a Terra é azul. Quando que ele conclui isso? Quando ele se ejeta do planeta e entra em órbita. E então ele tem a visão do todo. Existe na nossa ciência essa ilusão de que é possível ver o todo a partir de fora, né? A gente se retira da natureza, do que é natural, e descreve a natureza olhando de fora. Agora eu pergunto, é possível se retirar da linguagem para descrevê-la? Ou é possível se retirar da cultura? Can you write a paper without culture?
I guess no.
You are writing the paper in language. Language is culture. So you can see the other culture from your cultural perspective, which may imply certain problems. So what ethnographic positioning says is that it is important to get to know about the other culture by getting inside it, instead of investing in the illusion that should look at it from the outside. Go inside it, dive into it. You have to swim, in inverted commas, in the culture of the other. Get to know about it. It's not just describing it, it's living it. Ok? Já ouviram falar dos irmãos Vilas Boas? O trabalho que eles fizeram no Xingu?
Já.
Pois é. Foram viver como tal. Conviver com. Conhecer da prática, não apenas do teorizar. Não, vou olhar eles aqui de longe e descrever. É claro que nesse convívio você pode provocar alguma alteração, né? Mas o que os antropólogos hoje afirmam é que isso é muito menos, digamos assim, carregado de preconceitos e de pré-julgamentos do que uma postura de simplesmente descrever o de fora. Agora, a academia ainda está cheia disso. Quando você vai fazer uma análise discursiva de um tema, não falta quem diga, você precisa se distanciar do seu objeto de estudo, né? Isso foi o que eu mais ouvi, porque como ex-militante do movimento estudantil e pesquisador de um movimento social, pesquisei as jornadas de junho de 2013, uma das coisas que eu era acusado era de estar, talvez, ali colocando uma visão de quem foi um militante de esquerda ou de quem foi um militante do setor estudantil e que, portanto, tinha mais simpatia por um e não por outro. Obviamente que você precisa estabelecer uma linguagem de distanciamento, mas é impossível você se retirar completamente. Se vocês olharem quando forem escolher os temas do TCC de vocês, vocês não vão escolher nada a ver sua história de vocês. Vão escolher algo com que tenham familiaridade, do que gostem, né? Então é muito complicado falar em distanciamento absoluto, né? E isso tem a ver, essa ideia de que a gente pode se retirar do objeto de estudo e olhar de fora, tem a ver com o investimento positivista, que não considera que somos sujeitos, e isso vai ser tema quando a gente for ler em Orlando, somos sujeitos da linguagem, na linguagem, da e na linguagem. Portanto, somos sujeitos da cultura, somos assujeitados à cultura, criamos a nossa percepção sobre quem somos a partir da cultura e somos sujeitos na cultura. Nós só conseguimos agir dentro da cultura e dentro da linguagem, não existe fora. E sendo linguagem e cultura ideológicos, né, ideologia aí como a única forma possível de ver a realidade que a gente tem, né, somos sujeitos da ideologia. Tá? Tô quase terminando, tá, gente? Vou dar uma avançada aqui. So, Tyler's notion of generalization, objectivity, and so on was strongly influenced by the notions of Darwin and of natural sciences in general. They believed in evolutionism as something unilinear. So, we have discussed this. As long as you go through the same historical processes, you'll be as evolved as I am as an European. This is considering evolution as getting better, instead of considering evolution just as change. So if we had to summarize the perspective of anthropology nowadays, I'd say that the most important notion that we should have about anthropology is that anthropology does not establish a rupture with the notion of evolution, but it has a different perspective on what evolution is. Evolution is changing, it's not getting better. So, since cultures are a consequence of evolution, cultural differences are not a matter of being superior or inferior or more powerful or less powerful, but they are simply different. And why is it important for us as English students, as English professionals, as future English teachers, knowing that our culture does not own anything to English or North American or Australian or Canadian culture. We are not inferior, we are not superior. We shouldn't be euphemistic to say, no, I will not teach this language because this is the language of the colonizer and I do not want to colonize my students. But you should not be that resistant as well to what is yours. And you should not be that complexo de vira-lata. What comes from the outside is always good. American music is better because they have more culture, or English is easier because it has no grammar, or Portuguese is more difficult because it has lots of declinations. These are all beliefs that do not have scientific sustainability. This is my point when I introduce you to the anthropologic notion of culture. Okay. I don't know if you have seen this kind of positioning in the classroom, but I have seen this even in university professors. This belief that what comes from the outside is better. This belief that the political systems from Europe or from the United States are a role model for ours because they are rich. So if you want to be rich, if you want to have a powerful nation, you should copy what Europe has done, what the United States have done. uh, the notion that what does for the other should do for me. Have you seen this kind of discourse inside the classroom? You do not have to mention names, but maybe you could talk about it just to finish the class. This kind of positioning, colonized positioning in high school, in university, or so on, or in the English course, in the franchising networks.
I think it's more common in English courses with teachers that went to some English country and say that there is better, they have a better culture and things like that.
And normally they do not have a licenciatura. Yeah, normally they are those who go outside and learn the language by themselves or somehow, and they self proclaim themselves as English teachers. Uh, of course, having a diploma does not assure you will be more culturally conscious, more culturally aware. But that's my attempt here with this topic on cultural background of the English language, is to make you aware that cultural differences mean nothing but differences. They are not something that we should try to copy or to emulate. Okay, but I assure you, even in university, you see this kind of positioning. It's common, even in textbooks. And if possible, I'll try to bring you Professor Deusa to give you a lecture on her findings of chauvinism, of sexism, on um textbooks of the English language, and I mean modern textbooks. Sexism is everywhere in these books. This Eurocentrism or American centrism can be found in the nuances of discourse. Of course, it's not explicit, but it's there, and the role of the discourse analyst is look at it in between the lines and try to find these stereotypes, not to, I mean, get rid of them because it's impossible. Prejudice is all over, and for sure I have mine, you have yours. But for us to be more, to kind of be aware of that, and try to be more cautious with externalizing our prejudice. Well, by next class, I know I have passed the time. Next class, I'd like you to read chapter 1 for David Crystal's English as a Global Language. It is available on SIGA, okay, and you can download it and read chapter 1. Only chapter 1. I think it's something like 20 or 25 pages, okay? If you have any question, do you?
Professor,
Yes, please.
um, I just get on this class like today because Siga became a mess and doesn't count me at the first time. So I don't know
Yes, I saw
what
that the number of students has increased. That's
I don't
okay.
know.
Welcome to the class. The other
Thank you.
classes were recorded, so you can have access to them on Cigar. Okay.
I just want to know about if I much lost too much things on these two classes that I didn't participate.
Yeah, you should read Laraya's first chapter. Laraya's book is available on Cigar, which is Cultura, conceito antropológico. So you should read that. And maybe if you could watch the videos for the previous classes, I think it won't be of any harm for you. You will be able to follow the classes normally. There was no activity, no evaluation, not at all. Okay. Maybe by the middle of March, we are going to have some seminars that you should engage. I'd request you to get in groups. I have received some emails with the groups. I'd like you to get in groups of 4 people or 5 people, okay, so that I can assign you themes for the seminars, okay. As we finish
This
David
class
Chris,
has any WhatsApp group?
sorry.
This class has any WhatsApp group?
Well, I have received 2 emails from 2 groups. I won't remember now the names of the people, but I have received 2 emails. You can try to arrange with your classmates. Maybe if you have a WhatsApp group, things would be easier. I don't know if you do, but I don't know if you know each other, I mean, personally, or if you have already started like in remote teaching. I don't know. But you should get arranged and send me an email with the names in the groups. I have 2 groups that I received emails, but let me see. Let me change my email account here to find. So just a moment. I have received an email from Rebecca, which is Rebecca Rocha, Ana Beatriz, Adriana, and Samantha. This is one group. And I have received another email from Mirelle, which is her, Natalie, Raquel, and Vanessa. These 2 groups I have received emails from. Okay, the others you should get in touch among yourselves and arrange this. Okay. The attendance. Somebody's asking me about the attendance on the chat. I'll print screen here. Just a moment. Let me assure that everybody appears in the print.
Professor, era para ter colocado alguma coisa na chamada, é que eu cheguei um pouco tarde. Eu tive um problema de achar o link.
Não. Deixa eu só printar aqui. A chamada é meu print screen aqui. Deu certo já. Deixa eu voltar para o Zoom normal. Tá? A chamada é isso. Então, assim, pessoal, o pessoal que perdeu a aula, assiste os vídeos, tá? E tentem se organizar em grupo, tá bom? Tentem se organizar em grupos de 4 ou 5 pessoas. Eu tenho, por enquanto, 2 grupos de 4 pessoas. Vocês são, na minha lista aqui, 16. Né? Então, vai dar certinho 4 grupos de 4. Tem 2 grupos de 4 para se formar aí, tá bom? Alguém tem mais alguma dúvida, gente?
Não.
Ok, para a próxima
professor.
aula, David Crystal, capítulo 1, English as a Global Language. Tenta novamente rememorar, ao ler o livro do Crystal, rememorar o documentário, pensar essas questões de poder, de ascensão da língua inglesa como língua, supostamente, a gente vai usar muito esse termo, supostamente global, tá bom? Que a gente vai pensar a geopolítica do inglês um pouquinho.
Professor, acho que eu tô um pouco confusa com qual texto é. Qual o nome?
English as a Global Language, do David Crystal. Vou compartilhar aqui na tela, só um minuto. Meu cigarro expirou. Só um minuto. Sim, quem quiser sair, não tem problema, gente. Deixa eu interromper a gravação aqui.